Washington's receivers had a dominant day on Tuesday.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's the site editor with Athlon Sports' Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Lars, we got a really fun show today. We just got back from Tuesday's workout. We're going to be talking about some of the injured guys that we saw return to the field on Tuesday. We talked about a few of them on the on the Tuesday show, as all the everydayers know. We're also going to talk about Will Rogers, who I feel had his best day yet. And on top of that, it was a really, really strong day for Washington's whole receiver core, from Denzel Boston, who I believe made maybe the play of camp so far. I think we should start there.
That was the play of fall camp. In case we're any now again, honorable mention to some of the wide open touchdowns and nice routes in terms of how you want to say, oh, look, that was nice if they, ended up scheming that open. But that's more of a tip of the cap to Jedd than it is to the players. When Denzel went up and mossed Ephesians price talk today, I'm assuming that's the play we're referring to.
It is. He kind of pinned it to his back too on the way down.
It was a traditional Denzel catch where he's gonna find a way to high point the ball. Whether now we saw Jeremiah Hunter, to your point about just dominating the day on general, have go up and high point several balls. So it wasn't to that point. Like truly, it was more of a. But he got both feet down also. I think that's what it looked like to me. At least it looked like to me he got both feet down. And it was truly in one-on-one coverage in the back of the end zone. Those are like the money touchdowns that you need to have if you want to be in the NFL. And Denzel, saying this for about the last 18 months, he's been doing that in practice. He was doing that last fall. He was doing that in spring. And now it's just finally like his time. And when we talked to him after practice, it was kind of an indication like, yeah, Denzel's acting like a guy who's been the star for the last 2 years, but he's humble at the same point to know that he hasn't been the star, but he could have been. And now he's just ready. He's got the mindset to show everybody, hey, look, it's my time to shine now. I got to prove it. But this has kind of been a long time coming.
Right. He's been patient. He's waited his turn. Is really the best way to put it. And it's exciting where, we don't need to spend a ton of time on Denzel, since we've put a lot of hype around Denzel. We're very guilty of that on this podcast. Not a bad way either. But I think a couple other guys that we certainly need to talk about. One of them, let's start with Giles Jackson, because we also want to get into Kevin Green Jr., who had a really nice day. Audric Harris did as well. But I think Giles is somebody who, the more we watch him, the more we just kind of get to see what he's like in a true, I don't want to, not number one, just a true starting role. What he could look like, not just in this offense, but as truly a full-time starter. It seems like he's somebody who's just really primed for a big year, as we've said before.
Yeah, it's in a way the Zach Durfee effect, where a guy who's been, for one reason or another, forced to wait his turn, and both at Michigan and now at Washington. And he came out as a 4-star recruit. Giles had all the talent in the world, and you could see the speed, and we've seen that come to fruition. And now he's really his whole game is everything is molded together. He knows all the route tree. He knows where to be in the end zone. He knows not just to play the slot, but he can also play the X, can play the Y. He can play all over the field. Now, again, will more likely than not be in the slot. But even today, we saw where, he can win outside. He doesn't have to be schemed open in the sense, but although, I guess, to be fair, that second touchdown.
I was going to say, I'll get there.
I was going to say that. But either way, to your point, it's something where Giles – if anybody deserves to have a great season, obviously there's a number of guys we can list, but I think Giles would be at the top of the list for so many different reasons. If you think about it, came in 21 with Jimmy Lake, had the dollar, they said he was going to be Tyreek Hill. Imagine you being Giles Jackson, hearing John Donovan and Jimmy Lake say, hey, we want you in the Tyreek Hill mold, and then look back at what happened. And now is my first year where I'm really, truly healthy, going to see the field, guaranteed, not guaranteed starter, but barring a very much surprise, significant starter and contributor for this team. Giles is the one that deserves it more than anybody.
I couldn't agree with you more there. So he had 2 touchdowns today. I had to double check in my notebook there because he had a whole bunch of big plays. He connected with Will Rogers. I have here for 25 yards. He had a 13-yard touchdown where he shook Peyton Waters out of his shoes. That was a really, really nice move. And then he just kind of barreled through in between 2 guys. I know Carson Bruno was one of them. I don't have written down who the other one was, but he barreled through 2 guys to get into the end zone. And then in the other one, it was kind of just a switch route where we saw 2 guys isolated against, it was Denzel and Giles Jackson were isolated out wide. They were kind of stacked too. And I told you before the play, I said, yeah, like I already know where the ball is going. And the whole opportunity was just to try to get Thaddeus Dixon isolated one-on-one, where it was a really fun practice that we saw today. There was a lot of jawing going back and forth, all good natured, all in good fun. And Thad on the defensive side was certainly one of the instigators of that. And Will Rogers had a little bit of an overthrow. And Thaddeus Dixon, it was intended for Denzel Boston. Thad just went at him and was like, oh yeah, this is what I do, all that sort of stuff. And then 2 plays later, Will comes right back at him and beats him with a perfect throw to Giles in the corner of the end zone. And that was the final touchdown I have written down from practice. But it's just really fun to see Giles in that role because they're so, I don't want to say creative because we've seen what they've done with these kinds of guys before, but they're really finding the way to make the most out of Giles' skill set with this coaching staff, whether it be Jedd Fisch, Brendan Carroll, Kevin Cummings, whoever it is you want to say, which is really nice to see, but he's not the only one that they're doing that with. Well, another one that you mentioned to me throughout practice was Kevin Green Jr., where he was another guy who had a really, really nice day.
And really, honestly, kind of had an underrated fall camp. And Kevin Cummings talked about that after practice, where he's just a guy, and it's what I said, when he landed out of the transfer portal. Not a ton of production in terms of he's not McMillan, he's not even Dorian Singer, but you can see the exact mold of which one he's going to follow the track of at Washington.
Sure.
Another Giles Jackson, but younger, just a younger. To be fair, he's a little bit smaller than Giles. Giles, does have that kind of 5th year. Hey, I've been in college. The body is fully developed and all of that. Not that Kevin isn't, but I think Kevin could get maybe a little bit bigger, probably next year. But he's going to see the field a significant amount this season when you look at the rotation that they've just been showing and the fact that he already knows the scheme also. He's coming in a little bit advanced. And you've kind of seen that where he just knows where to be, whether it's Damon, whether it's Will. I don't think he's really gotten a chance for Shaker Kendall. But either quarterback that he's worked with, and mostly, to be fair, it's been Damon, but even when he's gotten in with Will, he just ends up exactly where he needs to be, just like Giles. And honestly, kind of just like a lot of the receivers in the room where they just already seem to be – and I know I touched on Monday's show, but again, I touched on the center relationship with Will Rogers, but I think the relationship between quarterback and receiver is certainly down. I think it's just a matter of how quickly can that O-line, which I think is going to be too much of a gap. But I think the wide receivers are certainly ahead when you give a head-to-head relationship.
For sure. And another thing that, when we think about Kevin Green Jr., when we talked to Kevin Cummings after practice today, one of the things that he said was, yeah, he's somebody who we already knew he knew the offense. We trusted him with that. Where Kevin Cummings kind of gave us what the second team has been so far, especially with Rashid Williams, who's been out due to an injury. And we'll talk about him a little bit later. And it's been Audric Harris, it's been Kevin Green Jr., and it's been Keith Reynolds. And those 3 guys have been really good, and they've all been really consistent. I've been really sure-handed, and it's just nice to see that those guys were in the spring. You talked a lot about making sure that Damon Williams had a reliable target, and that's why we saw him working with Jeremiah Hunter so often. Now he's got Kevin Green, and he's got Keith, and he's got a couple of these other guys that he can work with and get that chemistry with that we know are going to be here for at least a couple more seasons, so they can all just kind of form that bond right now. And Lars, that being said, speaking of quarterbacks, Will Rogers had himself a really nice day on Tuesday, which we'll get to right after a message from our good friends over at Game Time, because Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch, which is one of my favorite things about Game Time, because I've been to so many games at a bunch of different stadiums already over the course of this baseball season. I'm hoping to hit up a couple more Mariners games before the year is done. take some friends, and where we find our tickets on the Game Time app, because they got last minute deals. You can save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. They got flash deals. You can save even more exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. They've got all-in pricing where you toggle this feature and it shows the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. You can take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. So, Lars, it was a really nice day for Will Rogers on Tuesday. We saw him just throwing the ball all over the yard. There's one play in particular that I felt we need to lead with, where we were talking about Giles a little bit earlier, and Will, it wasn't a sprint out or anything, but he had the wherewithal to make a play, get out of the pocket, escapes to the right, and just floats it over the top of the defender, Jordan Shaw, into Giles Jackson's hands for the first big gain that I have written down for him, which is about a 25-yard play. And it was really nice where, you think about some of the offensive line struggles that we've discussed and with the questions we still have there. But with Will, who isn't necessarily known to be a runner or a super athletic guy all the time, where he made a really nice play to get outside the pocket, and he showed exactly why. I know some fans are still clamoring for Demond Williams to compete for the starting job, where Will showed exactly why the job has been his to lose the whole time, where he's showing the veteran leadership and experience that a fifth-year senior has, where Demond has made some awesome plays. He's made some fantastic plays, but he can still continue to develop in certain ways, which again is okay. He's 18. He's still a true freshman. He's got a lot of time to grow. Whereas Will can come in and do that job right now, and then Demond can still offer more upside going forward. But those are the kind of plays that I think is what sets Will apart right now, and what honestly, as we said a few weeks ago, can make him one of the best quarterbacks in this conference this season.
Yeah, well, it's a kind of symbolic when you look at how that drive started versus how it finished. And it was the Denzel Boston touchdown against Bryce Hall is how it finished.
Yeah.
And it kind of leads to your example where Will knows how to place the ball to all types of receivers all across the field. Now, is he the perfect quarterback? No. Is he Michael Penix? No. Is he going to, drive that thing, 100 miles an hour on a dime between two defenders? No. But he's certainly, with this scheme, kind of is just the perfect quarterback, because we've seen, he's got the ball to whoever you want to pick. But he also can, throw kind of a direct, more diving ball to Giles to, get it to him as a smaller receiver. So he's got all that experience. Where Demond, we absolutely can see the upside. We see the legs. I don't know why I think there's somehow, some way going to be a package for him when it comes to running, because I just have to imagine if you really want that situation, you want your fifth-year veteran. Now, to be fair, the other side of the coin is, if Will does do it and then gets hurt, no matter what, Demond, it's like, right. But how about you give Demond the chance as the athletic quarterback, kind of like a Cam Newton package, if you will, but still have Will as your entrenched starter, guaranteed, this is the guy, and he can still run, because I think that is probably something of his part of his game that I'm glad you mentioned, because he probably doesn't get noticed for it as much, because when you look back at his time in the air raid offense under Mike Leach at Mississippi State, there was no chance he was going to be asked to run anything anytime there, except maybe shuffle a little bit in the pocket. Whereas clearly in this offense, they want something of a dynamic ability in that quarterback. It doesn't necessarily have to be a true dual threat in the sense of, hey, we're going to run two, run pass two, run two, pass two, or anything like that. But we've seen, especially with the offensive line problems, you kind of might want to have a quarterback who can still keep his eyes down the field, but has an ability to actually gain 10 to 15 instead of just scramble for maybe 1 or 2 to stay alive.
Sure. And I don't necessarily think that we're going to see a lot from Will this season, where that's certainly not part of his, his archetype, if you will, but it's part of Jedd Fisch's archetype. So if he wants Will to go out there and make one of those plays every now and again, Will's going to find a way to do it, which is really nice to see. But we just saw so many just throws and perfect placement from him today, where it's obviously it all comes back to the offensive line at a certain point, where it's will the line hold up and give him the time that he needs to make some of these throws. Where, as you said, it's certainly not going to be Michael Penix. And I mean that with no disrespect intended to Will, where that's just a different guy. He went the 8th overall. We know this. We know that's just a different level of athlete, of thrower, of whatever it is you want to say. But Will, in his own right, is a very, very good quarterback, where he throws a touch, he throws with accuracy. He doesn't have the same velocity, that's for sure, but he can still get the ball into the tight windows. And he has the confidence and the leadership that is needed for what this team is. Like, I mean, I'm sure the everydayers have noticed, we haven't talked about the AP poll rankings with Washington ranked outside the top 25. And we're not going to. This is the only point where we're going to mention it, where we understand it. We've discussed that at various points throughout the summer. But Will is the kind of guy where, if you look at this team week 4, week 5, Lars, as we were talking about before the show, and this team is unbeaten, ranked, whatever you want to say, 17, 18 in the country by that point, you're going to be pointing your finger at Will Rogers and saying, this is a really big reason why, where, not even with me being a big Patriots fan and everything like that, but saying, oh yeah, certainly the defense is going to have a lot to do with that. It's going to be because Will Rogers is leading the charge, because the 5th-year veteran quarterback is doing exactly what he was brought here to do. Be a bridge to DeMond. Be a bridge to that next generation. And he's showed today exactly why he's going to be the best possible person to do that this year.
Exactly. And the other side of that, to be fair, when you talk about whoever would win that job and it's setting up the offense, is kind of what we're talking about here. Nobody better to have a fresh new scheme come into play with 2 rotating centers and a lot of question marks. Even if everybody's healthy, you still got questions, because is it D'Angelo? Is it Enoch? Is it Landen? Is it D'Angelo? There's a lot. Is it McCree? Is it Swanee? There's plenty. Now, I think Guard and Drew as a party are safe, but there's still 3/5 of your offensive line where things are going to need to be shaken up or could be shaken up. If you have DeMond, and it's not to say, because I think DeMond, to his credit, is advanced when it comes to setting up an offense and being able to get all the alignments done, because there hasn't been a ton of alignment mistakes from when DeMond's in the game. I think because you mentioned people asking us about DeMond, I'll give it to you right here. He's still there's a gap, but it's a good gap. It's a luxury gap. We want to win right now. And Will Rogers is a 5th-year veteran quarterback with ample experience in the Southeastern Conference, gives us the best chance. It's not to say that DeMond couldn't end up being the better passer and better overall quarterback 3 years, 4 years from now, when we look at where's Will drafted versus where's DeMond drafted and how do they both develop. But in that same respect, that's why you bring in the veteran in Rogers, to make sure, hey, you know what, year 1, we're going to, similar to Austin Mack. It's a perfect example of Austin Mack with Michael Penix, right? Come in, sit behind Demo and Penix, and one of the best quarterbacks in the country that goes in the top 10, learn how to be a quarterback, learn how to be, not a student athlete, but a kid in college and playing college football and getting up to speed and just learning how to be a pro, as Jedd would say. So when you come in next spring and you and Shea and whoever we decide and Dash, because he's coming in January, are going to battle for the job then, where it's actually more of a competition than this is, DeMond will be so much further ahead than both of them because of this experience and still having a legitimate competition. I think that's why Jedd's giving him the competition and saying, look, it's Willis to lose. And yeah, the offense had a good day today, but I don't think they haven't strung together 3 or 4 consistent practices. They almost did, except for the spring game. Or the first preseason mock game on Saturday, where defense certainly won for the first hour plus of that practice. If you don't have that, then we're talking Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then today. That's a week straight of the offense looking pretty good. So this defense, I think, is giving them problems enough. But this is, again, it's just, you cannot, having that veteran presence is irreplaceable. It's something that DeMond can bring the legs. Will's got the experience. When you're a first-year head coach, you're taking the experience.
No, absolutely. And as the season continues to approach, it's exactly what you said, exactly what they're looking for. Where, yeah, the defense was certainly very dominant for, I want to say, like, even, a good part of the start of the second half of that scrimmage that we were at on Saturday, where outside of that, you're right. The offense has certainly picked it up and in its own right has turned it around, where people always say, oh, the defense is ahead of the offense in terms of install and this and that. And that's certainly true around the country. That's certainly very true. And that's not necessarily, like something that's also unique to Washington in terms of, oh, the offense is so far behind the defense. But when we've talked about this defense, we've talked about how inventive it is. Will said it himself. This is the toughest defense that he's ever had to face in terms of what it's throwing at him and how many different things it can do. And as we said on the Monday show, where we discussed that after the scrimmage, we said the exact same thing, where this is only going to help him in the long run. Where all the stuff he's seeing, and as exactly what he said to us is, I feel that I'm not going to see anything tougher this season in the Big Ten than what Steve Belichick and this defense is throwing at me right now. And I feel that that's the most important part, because when you look at a guy like Will, who's played so much college football and has seen so much and seen a lot of good defenses playing in the SEC, that's all really important. And when, that's why we wanted to lead with the receivers and then talk about Will, where he's got to get the ball to them, but they've also been proven at this point that they're going to make a lot of plays for him. And it's very complimentary and it looks really good. And all the questions are on the offensive line at this point. It's, are you going to be able to make it work? And if they do, this is going to be a really, really solid football team. And it all, at the end of the day, will come back to Will Rogers, where he's going to be the one where, you're looking at this. Let's say they're 6-2, right? Let's say they're 6-2. We're going to look back at this, just as I said with 4-0, they're ranked wherever they might be. We're going to be pointing at Will Rogers and saying his veteran leadership, his experience, all those passing yards, all those passing touchdowns in the SEC, they do mean something. And they do mean that he was ready to lead this team and be that perfect bridge player, which is something that I truly cannot say enough, cannot be overlooked. And Lars, with that being said, we saw a whole bunch of injured players return to action on Tuesday. So, Lars, we saw some good news where we talked about Landen Hatchett. We talked about Zach Durfee. We're certainly going to discuss their roles as well. But we saw a couple other guys who had been dinged up over the last couple of weeks return to practice. The first one that I feel we need to talk about is Rashid Williams, where we talked about a lot of receivers and quarterbacks throughout the course of this show already. Rashid was back in full pads and looked good, where, he's still a little bit limited. The coaching staff was certainly being careful with some of his reps, but it was really nice to see him back there on the field.
Yeah, when you talk about you're great at the starting receiver position and you have some decent depth, but there could be some help along that regard. And Rashid is a guy where I believe he was a 4-star in the 23 class, came in last year where there, I remember talking to him in his recruitment. He was a guy where I think, he was one of those COVID year kids that I think he had an injury of sort. I can't recall at the top of my head exactly what it was, but he's not his first rodeo with, kind of having to work through some things. But what he said, the reason why I'm mentioning that is because it said that kind of made him mentally tougher. And so now seeing him back, you could almost imagine, okay, Rashid now knows, okay, I can handle these bumps and bruises. I can, get ready to get lined up. And when you look, when we saw him in the spring, he was great. Like from what we saw, all things considered, none of us thought he was going to be your starting slot receiver, but you could see exactly what Kevin Cummings was thinking probably for 25, but as a backup potentially for 24. Behind, competing with Audric and Kevin Green Jr. and some other guys in that position. But having that kind of big body receiver, especially either playing outside or inside, that's something where we've seen Audric Harris and when we talked about him as well. But there's kind of a little bit different game that Rashid can bring. And if they can tap into both those guys, that's where you're talking about really having some depth moving forward, not just for this season, but also season beyond.
Absolutely. And, when Kevin Cummings, when we talked to him and he didn't necessarily mention Rashid as part of the two deeps, I feel that was strictly injury related. And we've only seen him for a couple of practices now at this point, but he's somebody who I think is going to open up a lot in this offense, where he mentioned, playing like a 5-man receiver rotation mainly. Rashid certainly feels like he's going to be one of those guys because he can play inside and outside, as you said, where I was really impressed with watching him in the slot where, the loss of Jeremy Bernard hurts, but it is what it is at this point. And Rashid is going to fill a similar role where I don't think he's the same player as Jeremy is, where Jeremy certainly did some different things than Rashid and vice versa. But I think that he's going to fill that role really nicely, where it's a guy that can, sustain some of those hits, moving down into the slot sometimes and, just going over the middle of the field and doing whatever it is that you might want him to. But we saw him develop a really great rapport with not only Damon Williams, but with Will Rogers as well over the course of the spring. So getting him out there is crucial, and you'll love to see that. The one guy who I'm honestly the most intrigued to talk about, because we've seen him just get more and more reps with the first team, even today when he's wearing a non-contact jersey, is Cameron Broussard. where it was a minor injury, as Jedd Fisch said, where he dislocated a finger during Friday's practice, which is why he was held out of the scrimmage. And when, as Jedd mentioned to us after that Saturday practice, and they just needed to hold him out for a couple of days, and he's wearing like a club on that hand just to make sure that it wasn't re-injured or anything like that. But it's a really nice sign to see him get back out there because, as you noted to me, where there are a lot of safeties that are on the field at different times, where sometimes there are 3 safeties out there on the field and one of them will drop in and play somewhere a little bit different. But having that flexibility and that versatility is really important on the back end. And we've really touted Broussard since he committed. We thought that he was going to play a big role in this defense. And the more we watch at fall camp, the more it certainly seems like he is.
Yeah, he's the guy that screams, if you can make it through fall camp and enter the season healthy, you are going to be a key contributor. It just seems like, and it's not because there really hasn't been an injury history or problem with him. And I'm not saying there is, because obviously he was back today at practice. But I just think it's one of those, there's sometimes where guys get kind of nicked up and they don't end up. Jordan Perriman, perfect example, where a guy who came in, was dominating in fall camp, and then the injury happens, and it's like, oh, never really was the same after that. As long as Cam can avoid that fate, I think he could be right there with Cam in front of Mikel. Sorry, there we go. Because when you look at the game the kind of style of play that he plays with, the reason why he's so versatile is that size is beyond coachable in terms of he can come down, play in the box, play outside, can line up against a linebacker if you need him to, and either in the nickel or as a 5th linebacker, whatever you want to call it. There's just so many things that we've already seen him do in fall camp, even though he hasn't necessarily had the quickest ramp up because they're still trying to learn the system and all that. He's just a guy where I think if he can get enough of a running start by the end of September, he's the guy that you could see, oh wow, that might end up being one of the better transfer safeties in the country when you look back at what this class is able to do and how he stacks up.
Absolutely. And that's the biggest thing is we know he was really highly touted. We know there were a lot of other big time programs that were in on him that were trying to secure his commitment. And that's why, getting him in the boat, even after getting Justin Harrington, was such a big deal because it's, now this really opens up so many different things in terms of personnel and all that on the defensive side. And we've seen that. And we've seen exactly what that's going to look like. And fans are going to have a chance to look at that on Saturday if they want to check out the big Husky kickoff, as Jedd Fisch has been calling it. A couple other guys we want to get to. Yeah, we spent a lot of time on them on the Tuesday show, but that's Zach Durfee and Landen Hatchett. Lars, let's start with Zach Durfee because he played a little bit more. Obviously, they're coming off of very different injuries, but Zach spent a lot of time with the first team, certainly took by far his most reps of fall camp. And it was really nice to see him just back out there because he looked really good.
I was going to say, this is why I said a couple months ago, the one person going to play the most pissed off this season is Zach Durfee because the most unjust thing happened to him last season. I know that's an opinion, but that's just also kind of a matter of fact.
Yeah, it's not. It's a fact.
But the reason why I say that, he's such a humble kid. Like, he doesn't act pissed off. He doesn't, doesn't sound bitter when you talk to him. I know we both got the chance to talk to him at the preseason media event. He's just everything is the offensive Giles Jackson in a different way, but where you just look at him and every time we look up, it's, oh, there's Durfee with another pressure. Oh, there's Durfee might have been a half sack TFL. He's just constantly making plays. And that's why it's, again, as long as he can come through fall camp healthy, which is sounding like it is. And I think the coaching staff, to their credit, really have done a good job kind of managing these guys ramp up, where none of them have seemed to go out and then regress, where we haven't seen Landen in a similar light come back and then be like, we pushed him too hard or he pushed himself too hard. And now he's out for the month of September. And I think it's exactly the same thing with Durfee, where he was kind of cleared to start camp and was not going to be 100% of fall camp. And we've seen every single day he's gotten better. And it's not necessarily that he's gotten better. He's been able to look better because with every day the injury is getting better and he's further away from it. And more or less, he's kind of just playing free and comfortable. That's a lot of what you hear coaches say. He's not thinking, just playing. That's exactly what you need from an edge rusher, especially a senior edge rusher who knows all the moves, knows how to handle himself, just needs the ability to see the field after he didn't, was unjustly not able to last season for the most part.
Right. Final guy we got to get to is the one and only Landen Hatchett, where we saw him take some snaps to both the first and second team offensive line, which was interesting. The coaching staff tried by far the most combinations it has so far along the offensive line on Tuesday, where there are a whole bunch of different guys. Where we saw the first team line working with Denzel Williams, we saw the mainly second team line working with Will Rogers. We saw some combinations. We saw a whole bunch of different things. And all to say, Landen got, I would say, his most work in, where he definitely got more work than he did in during Saturday's scrimmage. And he certainly looks good. It's certainly nice to see where I really just want to echo that sentiment that you just had, Lars, of it's nice to see them doing the slow ramp up where it still feels like it might be a little soon after his injury. But if the doctors are comfortable with it, if the training staff is comfortable with it, if the coaches are comfortable with putting him out there, then that's all positive.
Yeah, if you think about it, I mean, the ironic part is it's like you have two centers that just arrived. It's Connor Williams arriving with the Seahawks and Landen both coming off severe injuries. And it's like, hey, I think I forgot if it was Kalen or who said it, but the medical evolution that's taken place with several injuries and not just the ACL. The ACL does seem like one where it's especially like, okay, and even just the knee in general. Let's just take the knee in general, but especially the ACL, where what used to be a 12-month rehab is now more like a 6-month rehab and then a 2-month ramp up. So you're at 8 months. And it's not because coaches are rushing it back or Landen's trying too hard or in similar light, like, Durfee, whoever. Nobody's trying to come back any faster, but obviously they're working hard. But there's just kind of a medical evolution that's really allowed this kind of players to kind of get a fresh lease on life, which is kind of nice.
No, it's great. And Lars, with that being said, thank you as always for being here. Thank you all the everydayers for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. And thank you for making Locked On Huskies your first listen of the day. Now go check out the Locked On College Football podcast from NIL deals to never-ending conference realignment rumors. Our guy, Spencer McLaughlin, gets you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron. You can find the link to the Locked On College Football in the description, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And just a reminder to also go check out the Locked On Huskies Insider Program, where we're dropping exclusive practice reports, the chance to chat with us one-on-one, access to our Google Drive, which has tons of player and coach interviews that we've done over the course of spring and fall so far. We're dropping all the interviews we're doing from the season only over there as well. We're also going to be doing exclusive Q&A on YouTube that you only have the link to if you are a Locked On Huskies insider, and we're going to have so much fun with that. We really do appreciate the community that we've been building over there so far. You can check that out down in the description below as well. You get a free 2-week trial, and after that, it's just $4.99 a month, and we're doing everything we can to make sure it is very, very well worth it. And with that being said, make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure you click that little bell and like the video, and you'll never miss when we post new video as well by clicking that little bell. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're all the only, please leave us a 5-star review. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you on Thursday.